Welcome back and welcome to part 2 of my Blender video editing tutorial series for complete beginners. Now if you haven't seen part 1 then definitely check that out. I'll have a link in the description to the tutorial playlist. And also at the beginning of part 1 in the tutorial series, I cover what you're going to learn in each part of the tutorial series. So in part 1, I show you how to get to Blender's video editor. So what I'm going to do is click here on File, and then I'll click on New, and then I can just open up a new video editing, and that'll go to the video editing layout. So in this part, I'm going to start off by showing you all the different types of strips and the different colors and what each strip is. So I'm going to click right here to my downloads folder because I have some example files here in my downloads. So if you hover your mouse in the sequencer and press Shift A, that's going to bring up the add menu. You can also click here on add and you can go to the add menu here. I'll press Shift A, and we're first going to be adding movie, which is a video file, sound, and then also images. Now you could add it here in the add menu, but I'm actually going to be adding it here in the file browser. So I'll just drop in this image here, also drop in this video here. Now there are a few other common strips which you'll probably use. So I'll press Shift A, and I'll go down here to color and just add a color strip. I can also press Shift A, and I'm going to add text. Hit G to grab, bring this up here. So I've just added in the most common strips which you'll probably be using. So this one is the audio strip. And so the audio strip is this light aqua blue color. Then we have the video strip. The video strip is going to be this darker blue color. Then we also have image strips, and that is going to be this orange tan color. Then we also have the color strip, and over here on the side panel, the color strip is going to be color coded as whatever color you make it. And then finally we have this text strip, and this is going to be kind of a purplish pinkish color. Now while you're video editing, you can actually change the color tags of the strips. And you can see there's this button here, and that is the color tag. So I can click on this, and then I could make any color tag. Maybe I'll go with an orange color. And I could do the same thing for really any of these strips. So if I select the video here, I could click on the color, and then I could maybe make this a purple color. So color coding your strips can actually become very useful if you have a large complex video edit and you have many different images, you have different audio and sound effects and music. It's a really nice way to organize your video editing by color tagging the different editing strips. Now if for some reason you really don't like the default colors of the different strips and you want to change them, then you actually can change this. I leave the colors at the default, but if you want to change the default colors, then you can click right up here on edit, and then you can go to the preferences. Then we're going to click right here on the themes button, and then I'm going to go down here to video sequencer and just open this up, and you can see here are all the default colors. So here's the audio strip. So if I wanted to change this, I could make this a different color, and I can really change all these. So if you want to, you can change these, and then after you've changed the colors, make sure to click on the save preferences button, and that way it'll save the preferences as the default. So that'll be the new default colors of the different strips. So I'll now click here to close the user preferences. All right, so we're now going to jump into the tools and shortcut keys of all the basic editing. So I'm going to move some of these strips over by left clicking to select them, and then I can left click and drag or hit G to grab and just move this over. So if I want to transform any of the strips, so if I want to rotate them, scale them, or move them, I can just select the strip, and then with my mouse in the preview, I can hit the S key to scale, so I could make this bigger or smaller. I could also press R to rotate, and I could rotate the text, and I can also press G to grab. And if I want to transform a strip on an axis, I can hit G to grab, and then I can click and hold with my middle mouse wheel, and you can see I can bring it on the Y-axis or the X-axis, and then I can just let go of the middle mouse wheel and bring it over. I can also just hit the Y key or the X key, so if I hit S to scale, and then I hit Y or X, it's just going to scale it or transform it on that axis. And just so that this text is a little bit easier to see, right over here on the side panel, I'm going to click on box here to see a box behind the text. Now speaking of the side panel over here, this side panel can also be used to transform the strips. So if I just click here on this arrow and then click and hold and drag down, I can close all these, and then I can just open up the transform. So here on transform, we have the position, the scale, and the rotation, and a few other settings. So I can click and drag to move this around, and I can drag it up and down, but it is much easier to just do this in the preview. So G to grab, R to rotate, and S to scale. And I'll just do this for the image instead. So if I click on the image, you can see this image also has the position, so I can move this around, and I can also scale this if I want to. All right, so let's go a bit deeper into basic editing. So if you want to cut a strip, you can drag the playhead to where you want to cut the strip, and then you can hit the K button. And if you want to cut multiple strips at the same time, I can hold down the Shift key, and I could like select the audio strip as well. So now you can see these are both selected, and I'll hit the K button to cut the strip. strips. So now if I drag the playhead, you can see they are cut. Now if I just undo that with Control Z, something that you may have noticed is that when I cut the strip, it selected this side. So I'm just gonna hover my mouse right here and I'll hit the K button and you can see it selected this side. So there's that orange outline, so these are selected. If I press Control Z though to undo that, I can move my mouse over to this side and press the K button again. And now that my mouse was on this side of the playhead, it selected these strips instead of the other strips. So if I'm video editing through this, and let's say that I just want to cut out the part where the toast kind of pops up. So I'm going to go right over here to the starting, and then I can move my mouse right here, and I can hit the K button. Now this side is still selected. Then I can click and drag the playhead over here. And after I cut this, I want to just delete the part where the toast pops out of the toaster. So I'll hover my mouse over this side now on the left side of the playhead. I'll hit the K button again, and now this side is selected. And then I can either hit the X button or the delete button to just delete it. So that is very useful if you know that you want to delete a certain side or you want to move around a certain side. You can hover your mouse on that side and it'll automatically be selected. So I can now left click and drag to select these strips, and I can hit G to grab, and then I can drag them over and drop them here. Now if you drag a strip into another strip, then you'll notice that it turns red. But if you drag a strip over another strip and then left click to place it, it's going to hop back over here. So you don't have to worry about the strips actually overlapping, because if I try to move them over, it won't actually overlap. Now I would recommend just memorizing the shortcut keys, because once you know the shortcut keys, it'll really speed up your workflow. However, I know that for beginners, it can be kind of hard to remember all the shortcut keys, and it can be kind of overwhelming. So if you don't want to remember the shortcut key of the K button to cut the strips, you can press the T key, and that is going to open up this side panel here. So right over here, you can click here on this blade setting, this blade tool, and when I click on the blade tool, now I can just move my mouse wherever I want to cut it, and then just left click to actually cut it. However, there are some problems with this. One thing is that it's hard to see the exact point where you want to cut it. You can of course just drag the playhead over here and then you can click there to cut it, but you can see right there the exact thing that I thought might happen did happen, where I tried to cut it and it actually cut it one frame over. Another problem with this is that I can't cut multiple strips at the same time. So if I click back here on the tweak and then I click and drag to select all three of these, I could just hit the K button to cut it and it's going to cut all of them because they're all selected. However, if I press Control Z to undo this, if I click here on the blade, then if I click right here, it's only going to cut the one that I've selected. So I prefer just to leave this at the tweak tool, and I just use the K button instead. That just makes much more sense. Now you can also see that on the corners of each strip there is a little darker area, and so those darker areas are the handles. So after you've cut a strip, if you want to change the size of it, you can just left click on the corner and you can see that handle is going to become white, and it's actually going to show you the frame number that it's on. So right now this is frame 199. So again, just left click on the corner and that's going to select the handle, or if you just left click in the center, that is going to select the entire strip. So if I just select the entire strip and then hit G to grab, that'll move the entire strip around. But if I left click on a handle and then hit G to grab, that is just going to move the handle, and so it's going to trim the edges. So let me just select this photo here and I will click on delete just to get rid of it so you can see this taking effect. So I'll just left click to select that handle there and I'll hit G to grab, or I can just left click and drag and I can trim the edges of this strip here. I can also do this for multiple strips at the same time. So if I hold down the shift key and then select this handle here, and then I can click and drag and I can move both of them at once. So these handles now bring me to the next topic, which is a hard cut. So we just talked about the K for a normal cut, but if you want to do a hard cut, then you can just select whatever you want to cut and then you can press Shift K. So K to do a normal cut and Shift K to do a hard cut. Now the difference between a normal cut and a hard cut is that when you do a hard cut, it is going to remove any of the video data from the cut. So if I click on this handle and then bring it over, you can see that this area here is a darker color. And if I make this much bigger and then click here and press the spacebar to play this, you can see that it's basically a freeze frame. So it's a freeze frame of this frame here. So this is what a hard cut is. It's not going to play any of the data after the cut. Whereas this cut over here, if I drag this over here, this cut was a normal cut, and you might actually call this a soft cut. So this one I just used the K button. So now if I click here on this handle and drag this one out, if I go through here and scrub this, you can see the video is moving. So this was a normal cut by hitting the K button, and if I drag this out, it'll still show the video. However, this one here was a hard cut. So for this one, I pressed Shift K, and then if I drag this out, you can see it's not going to play any of the video. Now, most of the time, you're just going to use a normal soft cut with K, but there are occasionally a few reasons why you might want to use a hard cut, but really for most things, I just use the normal soft cut with the K button. And one common reason why you might want to do a hard cut is if you are working with the video speed. So later in the tutorial series, I'll be showing you how to add speed control to videos. And if you add speed control to videos, it'll obviously change the speed of it. And so let's say there's a certain area that you don't want the video to be slowed down by, you can do a hard cut, and you can hard cut just the spot where you want the video to speed up or slow down. And then when you add the speed control, you won't be able to see that other part of the video. And we'll be going into that later in this tutorial series. Now, another way to edit the video strips is to hit the S key. Now, normally if you have your mouse here in the preview and you hit the S key, that is going to scale it. But if you have your mouse here in the sequencer and hit the S key, that is basically going to shift or offset the data in the strip. So if I hit the S key, now I can move this around, and it's moving around the data, so the video data in the strip. And so now it is moving along, and now I can play this, and you can see it's going to play at a different point in the video. Or I can hit the S key, drag it way over, and now it's going to play a different part. And the same thing works for audio. So if I drag this over here, drag the playhead over here, I can select the audio. And actually, to preview the audio, if I select the audio, I can go here to sound, and I can click on display waveform. And this is going to show me the audio here, so it's showing the music and the sound effects. So if I want to offset the data of the audio strip, I can hit the S key, and then I can drag this around. Now, I really don't use this very much. I don't use it for very many things. And I suppose why I don't really use it is because I want to keep the audio and video synced up when I'm filming my tutorials. But where I find this very useful is when you're using music or sound effects. So I've downloaded this robot sound effect from freesound.org. I'm going to click and drag and drop this sound effect into the editor. And then with this strip selected, I'll click on display waveform so I can preview this. So if I'm playing through this and I just want to add this little sound effect here, I can move the playhead over here, hit the K button, and then hit the delete button. Then I can drag this over here and select this side, hit the K button to cut that, and then the delete key. But then let's say I want to change this out for a different sound effect here in this audio file. Instead of having to drag this out to see more of the audio, I can instead just hit the S key, and that's going to offset the data, so I can drag this over here, and now I have a different part of the audio strip. So that's where I would find this feature useful. Alright, so we're now going to get into the different strip settings. So if you select a strip and press the N key, that's going to open up the side panel here, and there are many different settings, and this setting is going to change depending on what strip you have selected. So first, I'm just going to select this video strip here, which is the dark blue. So you can change the name of the strip here, so I could just rename this to video 1, and now you can see right here, it is renamed to video 1. Another way to rename this is to select it, and then press F2, and then I could rename the strip right here. So the name of the video is right here, and then this text right here, this is where it is located on my computer. You can see it's in my downloads folder. So on the side panel, I'm going to click and drag just to close all these arrows here, and we're first going to open up the compositing. So on default, the compositing blend is set to alpha over, and for most things, you just want to leave this set to alpha over. Now what alpha over will do is it'll use any transparency, or it'll allow you to put different images or videos on top of each other. So if I just click and drag and drop in this image here, I can now hit S to scale, make this smaller, and because this is set to alpha over, this video is going to be on top of it. Whereas if I click on this alpha over and just change it to replace instead, now you can see that it's not actually using the transparency, so we can't see the video behind this photo. So really, most of the time, you're not really going to use these. For the most part, you're just going to leave everything set to alpha over, which is the default. Now there's also the opacity, and this is going to be the fading of the media. So if you want it to fade away, you can turn this down, and I'll also show you later in the tutorial series how to animate the fade if you want to like fade images in and out or fade videos in and out. So now let's open up the transform, and you can use these transform values if you want to move around the video. So you can change the position here. You can also change the scale and the rotation, but it makes much more sense just to hit R to rotate, S to scale, and G to grab. And you can also mirror the strips if you want to with the X and Y. All right, so let's close this one and I'll open up the crop. So the crop feature is very useful, especially if I want to have media on top of each other. So I just have two videos here. I have this part here and then this other part here. I'm going to select this video strip and I'll first scale it down and move it over. But then let's say I want to crop it. I can easily just drag the left over or drag the right over and just make it smaller. So the crop feature is super useful, and now that's smaller and I can stick it right there. And then we'll close this one and we'll open up the video as well. So if you want to reverse the frames and make it go backwards, you can use the reverse frame. Now there's also this strobe feature here, and this strobe feature is going to cut out frames in between other frames. So if you want it to look more choppy or make it look like it is a lower frame rate, you can turn the strobe up. So I could, for instance, turn this to a 6, and now you can see it's cutting out a bunch of the frames. If I turn the strobe to 2, it's just going to cut out every other frame. So now it's only using half of the frames. It's still playing at the same speed, but it's just cutting out a few of the frames. So let's close that one, and we're going to go here to color. So there are a few color settings. There also are modifiers. So we're going to use modifiers later to do color correction, but there are a few color settings. So you can change the saturation of the strip that you have selected, and you can also change the multiply here. So this is going to make it like really bright. So you can do a little bit of color correction here, but I'll be showing you some more advanced color correction later in the tutorial series. Now there's also this time here, and this will change how long the video is. So there's first the channel, so you can move it up on the channels. These are the channels here, but it is much more intuitive just to move it up by clicking and dragging it. Now there's also this speed factor, and this is going to change the timing. So I'm just going to turn this to 2, and now you can see it is much smaller. You can see it got smaller, and now if I play this, you can see it is much faster. Or I could make this very slow. I could maybe turn it to like a 0.5, and now it's only going to be half the speed. You can see the video is much longer. So this is a quick way to change the speed of the video. And then there's also the start and the duration and the end. I really don't use these because it makes much more sense just to do it visually here. So move it around and change the start frame and the end frame, but you can change it here if you want to. So let's close that one, and there also is this source here. So this is the data source that the strip is getting the video from. So it's going to show you the resolution of the video, also the frames per second, and then you can also click here if you want to change the source. So you can click on this folder icon, and then you could, for instance, select a different video, and then it would be using a different video data in this video strip. And then there's also this deinterlacing check mark right here. And this is if you have a video which needs to be deinterlaced. So this would be used for if you have some kind of video camera and you're filming something and the video has that interlacing, you could click on the deinterlacing and turn that off. In this photo here, this is an example of what the interlacing looks like. And I actually grabbed this photo from the Wikipedia article. I have used a few older video cameras in the past that do have the interlacing. And so I just had to check mark the deinterlace, and that kind of fixed the problem with those little lines there. However, with newer cameras and with my phone camera, that isn't an issue, so it probably won't be an issue for you. But if for some reason the video you're using does have the interlacing, you can just check mark that to get rid of it. So those are all the video settings. Now as far as photos, the photos are pretty much exactly the same. So you have the compositing and the transform and all of the different settings, and you can do the same thing to photos as well. And this might be a better example for where you might want to use the source. So if I select this image and let's say I want to change the image, I could just click here on the change data or files. And that'll bring up Blender's file browser. I could select a different image, and now it's going to add that new image into that image strip. Alright, so now let's go over audio settings. So I can just select the audio here, and I'm going to close all these. So just like the other strips, you can rename it here. So I can just rename this to audio. And then you have the sound right here. So there is the volume. So this is pretty obvious what it's going to do. It's going to make the audio louder or quieter. And you could also animate this value. I'll show you later in the tutorial series how to animate values if you want to fade in and out the audio. Now there also is the mono here. So the mono is going to control which side it's playing if you are listening with different speakers or maybe earbuds or headphones. So if you leave the mono off, it's just going to play from whichever side it was recorded from, and so it may already be mono. However, if you turn on the mono, it's going to play equally on each side if you're using speakers or earbuds or headphones. And then when you turn on mono, you'll be able to control the pan. So if I turn the pan all the way to 1 or all the way to -1, it's only going to go in one side of my headphones, or I can just leave it at 0 if I want to keep it how it is. And then there's also this really useful feature which is the display waveform. And this is super helpful. I use it all the time because as I'm scrubbing through here, I can look at the different audio, and when I'm video editing, I can see myself talking and I can know where to cut the strips, and this is just super helpful for visualizing the audio. So I pretty much always turn this on when I'm using audio. Now there's also the time here, and the time is going to be very similar to what we talked about earlier with the videos. So as there is the channels, so I can move it up and down the channels if I want to, or I could just drag it. And then there is a speed factor, so you can make the audio faster or slower right here. So I can turn the speed factor down. I'll turn it to like a 0.5, and now if I play this, you can hear that the music is very slow. Or I can turn it up. I'll just turn it up to like a 3, and then I'll play through this again. And the audio is very fast. And then there's also the same settings like the start and duration and end, but again, I don't really like to use these. I just prefer to edit it here in the sequencer. So I'll close this, and then there's the source. So again, if for some reason you want to change the data that it's using, like if you've added a sound effect, but then you want to switch it out for another sound effect or some music, you can click here on the drop down and you can add the different audio files that you've added into your editing, or you can click on this file icon to use a different audio. And then there's some audio settings right here, so it's going to show you the sample rate. Alright, so now that I've gone over the main strip settings, I'm also going to show you the main shortcut keys and a bit more advanced editing. So if you want to select all of the strips, you can press the A key, and then if you want to deselect all the strips, you can double tap the A key. So if you have some large video editing and you want to zoom into a specific strip, you can select the strip, and then you can hit the period key on the numpad. And you can see it's going to zoom it in and scale it up so you can see that entire strip. So that's really useful if you have really big video editing or it's very complex. Just hit the period key and it'll zoom into the strip. Now, if you want to see your entire video editing, you can hit the home key. So just hit home and you can see it's going to zoom out and show you all of the editing. And then if you want to duplicate a strip, just select the strip and you can press Shift D. So Shift D will just duplicate the strip, and I can put it over here so we have 2 of them. Now let's say I'm doing some editing and I want to bring the text right over here. What I can do is I can select this strip, and instead of dragging it over, I can instead press Shift S. So Shift S is going to bring the selected strip over to the playhead. So if I'm doing video editing and I want to bring the starting videos over to the starting of the sequencer, I can click here, drag this over to the starting, and then click and drag to select these 2, press Shift S, and it'll bring it right over here, and then it will play at the starting. And then if you want to move through the starting and the ending of all of your strips, you can press the page up and page down. So I'll hit page up, that'll go to the end of that one, and then go to the next one. Then I'll hit page up again, and that'll go to the end of that audio. Then page up again is going to go to the end of this color here, and it'll continue to go to the starting and ending of each strip. Or I can hit page down to go backwards. So where this is very useful is if again you have a very complex video edit, and let's say I want to quickly bring the playhead over to this text, and it's right here. So instead of like dragging it over and trying to get it exact, I can just hit page up and it'll go right to the starting. Now I believe I mentioned this earlier, but if you want to delete a strip, obviously you can hit the delete key, but the delete key is a little bit farther away. It's on the other side of the keyboard, and my hand is usually also on the Shift and Control key, and also next to the Z button and the A button and all those other shortcuts. So what I like to do is hit the X key instead. So the X key can also be used to delete the strip. And then just like really any other software, Control Z is going to undo, and then Shift Control Z is going to redo. Alright, so I'm now going to show you how to eliminate lag by using proxies in Blender. So earlier in this tutorial series, I already talked about a couple other things you can do to make video editing less laggy. So one thing you can do is press the N key to open the side panel here in the preview, and you can go to View, and then you can click here on the percentage, and you could like make it 25, and that way the preview will be smaller, and so there won't be quite as much lag. Another thing you can do is click right here on the playback button, and then you can click on sync, and you can use the frame dropping or sync to audio. I like the sync to audio. I think that works the best. So those are 2 things that I do to remove lag when I'm video editing. However, using proxies is a much better way to eliminate lag when you're doing video editing. Now on default, Blender's video editor does have an automatic proxy setup. So I'm going to click on this video here, and I'm going to drag and drop it right here into the video editor. And as soon as I added that video into Blender, here in my downloads folder, you can see that Blender has created a BL proxy folder. And so this is the proxy files. And so Blender has automatically added some proxies, and it's added it here in my downloads folder. And that's because I have the video that I'm editing editing with in the downloads. So it's created the BL proxy folder, so Blender will set up some proxies on default. We can disable the automatic proxy setup, and we can also set up the proxies manually. So what I'm first going to do is go to the proxy settings in the user preferences. So I'll click here on edit and I'll go to the preferences. So we're now going to click here on the system tab in the user preferences, and we're going to open up the video sequencer. And you can see right down here we have the proxy setup, and you can see on default it's set to automatic. I actually use manual because I prefer just to keep it at manual, and I only want to add proxies to the videos that I want to add it to, so I leave it at manual, but you could leave it to automatic if you want to. But even if this is set to automatic, you can still set up the proxies manually. So it really doesn't matter, you can use whichever one you want. I'm just going to leave it at manual, and then I can close the user preferences. Now this video that I'm using here has already been edited and rendered, and so it has been compressed a little bit, and so the file size is less data, so it isn't really that laggy. You can see I can drag this around and it looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is select everything and I will delete it, and then I'm going to add in a different video. So this video here is the raw footage of part 1 of this tutorial series, and you can see if I drag it around it is a little bit laggy, it's taking a while to catch up, and if I press the space bar you can see right there on the frames per second it is a little bit laggy. So I'll now show you how to set up proxies so that it is much faster. So you just want to select the video strip, and then we're going to go down here to the proxy tab here on the side panel, and then we want to click on the check mark here to turn on the proxies. So then here on the proxy setting you can click on a directory if you want to, and you can choose somewhere where Blender is going to save the proxies. I don't really use this though because I have Blender just add the proxies in the same folder with my raw footage. That just makes sense for me to have the proxies there. So I'll turn this off. So if you don't set up a custom directory, it'll just save the proxy data in the same folder with this video file. So now you can choose a resolution. So if you do want it to look very high quality, you can. So you could turn it to 100. However, this will take much longer to set up the proxies. So when I'm doing my video editing, I turn it to 50, and then you can choose the quality. So if the quality is smaller, it will look a little bit lower quality in the preview, but it'll set up the proxies much faster. And I usually do want the proxies to be set up really fast, so I turn the quality to 1. And you can also set up multiple ones if you want to. You can see I can select multiple ones, but I'm just going to select the 50%. And then the quality is at 1. So now what I can do is click on rebuild proxy and timecode indicate. So when I'm doing that, now you can see there is a progress bar, and you can see it is taking a while. However, this video is really quite long. You can see it's over a half hour long because this is my raw editing file of part 1. So just to speed up the progress, I'm actually going to click on the exit here to get rid of this and stop it. I'm going to choose 25 instead, and then again I'll click on the rebuild proxy and timecode indicates, and it'll go quite a bit faster. Alright, so it's finished. So one more thing you have to do after it's finished making the proxies, you need to press the N key to open the side panel, and here if I open this up, the proxy render size, you need to choose the resolution which you created. So we created the proxy size of 25%, so I'll choose 25%, and now that I do that you can see it is really small and does look low quality, but now if I drag this around it's super fast. There's basically no lag, and if I play this you can see it's pretty much always caught up to 60 frames per second there in the corner. And if I drag this around it's super smooth, and I can cut these. So if I just box select these, I can hit the K button to cut the strips, select these, and I can cut them, and I can move them around, and it's really fast, and there's basically no lag. And you can do the same thing of course for the 100%, and then the preview would look much bigger and much more crisp, but it will just take longer for the proxies to be set up. Now once I'm fully finished with a video editing project, I delete the BL proxy folder, and I delete it after I'm finished with the entire project because I won't need it anymore after the project is finished, and also the proxy data is a very large file size. So here on the folder, if I right click and go to the properties, I can go here to the contents, and you can see it is totaling 828 megabytes. And so that is quite large, and so after I'm done with a video editing project, that's just a ton of extra data. So after I'm completely done with a video editing project, I just delete this folder from my computer because I don't need that extra data. Now this proxy setup won't actually affect the final render. So it does look kind of low quality now, but if I click here on render and then click on render image, you can see it's going to render in the full quality. So it's not going to use the proxies for the actual render. It's going to use these settings right up here that you've chosen for video editing for the actual render. Alright, so I'm now going to show you my render settings and how you can render out your edit to a final video. So once you've edited your video and you've watched through it and you like how it is, you need to make sure of course to set the start frame and the the end frame. So you can see right here in the corner I have the start frame at 1, and the end I'll change to 300. So it's a 300 frame animation. Then of course, just in case Blender crashes if you're rendering, you should definitely save the Blender file. So to save the file, you can click right up here on File, and then click on Save, or you can also press Ctrl S. And then Blender's file browser will appear, and you can just locate a folder with your other project files. And I can just call this tutorial editing.blend, and then I will just click on Save As. So now let's go over the render settings. So I can just open up this side panel to make it a bit bigger. And when you first start editing, it is really important to change the resolution and the frame rate, because once you add text and audio and video and things, if you change this, it can mess up some things. So it is important to already go over these at the very starting before you start video editing. So I'm going to render this at 24 frames per second. And also 1920 by 1080. So I'm now going to scroll right down here, and I'm going to open up the output. So here on the output, we want to tell Blender where we're going to render the final video. So let's click on this file icon, and then it'll open up Blender's file browser, and you can just locate to the folder where you want to save the videos. I usually just save it to my desktop, and then it will just render out the video on the desktop, and then from there I can rename it, and I can move it somewhere on my computer. And then here on the name, I can just type in final video, and then I will just click on accept. So it'll save it now here in my downloads folder. Now here on the file format, it may have already set it up automatically to FFmpeg video. If you went file and then clicked on new and then clicked on video editing, it should have already set it to FFmpeg video on the default. But if it didn't, then just click here on the file format, and FFmpeg video is really the best video format to use when rendering videos. Now also what's really important is the color management, and I talked about the color management earlier in the tutorial series, but the color management is used for like color correction and making the renders look more realistic when you're doing 3D rendering. But when you're video editing, you don't want to use the color management. You want it to just be at the standard settings, because if I click right here on the render properties and scroll down, I can open up the color management, and if I change the view transform to filmic, this will change the exposure when you're rendering with the 3D side of Blender, and it'll make it look more realistic. However, you can see it's kind of grayed out the image. So when you're video editing, you want this to be set to standard and the look to none. So right back here on the output, you can see it's set to standard and none, but if for some reason it isn't, you can just click on the override, and then you can just change those settings. Alright, so I'll close the color management, and I'm now going to open up the encoding. And this is really where you get into the more detailed settings. So here on the video codec, I've found that H.264 works great for most things, and these settings, which I'm going to go over, these are the settings that I use for uploading videos to YouTube and really any videos. So I'm going to use the video codec of H.264. Then here on the output quality, I'm going to just leave this at medium quality. Now you might think that you want to turn it all the way up, but if you turn this all the way up, then it's not going to compress it quite as much when you're rendering, and so technically there will be more detail, but really just setting it to medium quality, you're not really going to notice any lowering of the detail if you're just rendering it out once. So I just leave it at medium quality, and it really doesn't affect the quality, and it'll keep the video's file size a little bit smaller. However, occasionally I will change this to the lowest quality if I'm specifically trying to make a video which is a very small file size. So maybe I'm rendering out a very short video, and for instance, I might be trying to email that very small video, and as you may know, emails don't really work that well when sending large file size. Or maybe you're trying to upload a video and it just needs to be a small video, so you want to keep the file size lower. So in that case, you can change it to lowest quality, and this will make the final video file size smaller. However, I don't use this very much because it does actually make the video a little bit glitchy and it can look kind of low quality. So for most things, I just leave it at medium quality. And then on the other side of that, there is higher and higher quality. And occasionally I will use this lossless. So this lossless is not going to compress the video at all, and it's going to be completely lossless, so it'll keep all of the data in the video. Now the problem with this is that the file size can be really massive. And as you may know, I do create pretty long tutorial videos. Some videos on my channel are over an hour, so if I were to set this to lossless, the file size would be extremely big. It would be many gigabytes, especially if it were a large video. So I don't use lossless very much. However, there are a few cases that I would use lossless. For instance, if I'm making a small little clip which I'm going to be adding to other videos, then I will set this to lossless. And that is because I want it to keep all of the quality. Like let's say this little clip here is maybe an intro video to something that I'm going to be adding in my videos. Well, I might want to render this out to lossless, this, and that'll keep all the quality, because then once I render out this video, I might want to add this video which is rendered into another video editing file. So that is where the lossless can be very helpful, so I do occasionally use it. However, the file size is really massive, and so I don't use it very often. So I just usually leave this at the medium quality. And then the encoding speed, you can just leave that at good. And I leave these other settings how they are. Now here on the audio codec, I found that AAC really does work the best. You could use some others like MP3, but I find that AAC just works best for most videos. And then you can also choose the sample rate and the bit rate of the audio. So here on the sample rate, I've just set this to 48,000, and the bit rate, I've set this to 256. And if you want to do more research into the best sample rate and bit rate to use, there are some articles online which kind of talk about it, but I've just found that 48,000 for the sample rate and 256 for the bit rate works really well. So those are all the settings which I use to render my videos, and these are the video settings that I use when I'm uploading videos to YouTube. So once you've set up all the settings and once you've saved the file, you can press Ctrl F12, and Ctrl F12 is the shortcut key to render the animation. And then you can hit the escape key if you want to escape out of that and you want to cancel it. Another way to do this is to click on render and then click on render animation. And you can see it is now rendering through. So then once the video is rendered, you can navigate to where you saved the video. Here it is in my downloads folder, and you can see it says final render, and then it has these numbers here, and these numbers are actually the start frame and the end frame. So I usually rename this because I don't really like these numbers being here, but if you were wondering, that's what those numbers are. So it's the start frame and the end frame of what it rendered. And then you can open up the video. I've opened it up here with VLC Media Player on my computer. So that is how you render out videos with Blender's video editor. Now, as well as rendering out videos, you can actually export just the audio to an audio file. You can click here on render, and you can click here on render audio. And then in Blender's file browser, you can locate to a folder where you want to render it to, and then I could call this audio only. And then once you've renamed it, you can press the N key to open this side panel, and you can choose the container. So you could use WAV if you want to, or like MP3. MP3 is a pretty common one, or like the FLAC here, and the FLAC is going to be a lossless file. So if you want a lossless file so the audio doesn't lose any data, you could use FLAC. And then there's also a few other technical settings that you can choose for the audio. And then you can click on mix down. And so this is just going to export all of the audio to an audio file on your computer. So that's really useful if you just want to do some audio editing, or you just want to export out an audio version, then you can just do it like that. Alright, so I've just opened up a new Blender file and I've loaded up the default factory settings of Blender. And I'm now going to show you how you can set up a default startup file so that Blender already has the video editor set up on default when you open up Blender. And I'm going to show you all the settings that I recommend. So the first thing that I'm going to do is click here on edit and then go to the preferences. And then I'm going to go over here to the interface, and here on the resolution scale, I talked about this earlier in the previous part, but I like to turn this to a 1.36, and it probably will depend on the size of your monitor and how big you like the text to be, but I find this a pretty good size and it makes the text easier to read. So that is something that I like to turn on my default startup file. Now anything in Blender's user preferences, once you change the setting, you need to click on the Save Preferences button there, and that'll save the preferences, so when you open up Blender, these preferences will be on the default. So I'm now going to close these user preferences. Now because I also use the 3D side of Blender, I like to have Blender set up with the 3D viewport, but then I like to have the video editing as a tab here, so up here on a workspace. So what you can do is you can scroll over here with your mouse over the workspaces, and you can click on the plus here, and you can go to video editing, and then you can add a new video editing layout. And then what I do is go back over here to the layout. So if you want to, you can do it that way. However, if you don't do any video editing in Blender, then what you can do is just click on File and click on New, and then you can click here and open up a new video editing. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to just have the video editing over here in a workspace, but if you want to, you could just have it completely video editing. So now that I have this video editing tab, I want to do a few more settings. So you can change the resolution here. So just for this example, I'll leave it at 1920 by 1080, but because I have a 2K resolution monitor, I actually set this resolution to 2560 by 1440. And that is 2K resolution. However, just for this example here, I'll leave it at 1080p. And then here on the frame rate, I just leave it at 24 frames per second because again, I also use the 3D side of Blender, so I just leave it at 24 frames per second. And then you can also scroll right down here, and on the output, I clicked on the file icon and I set this to the desktop. So I'm gonna click right here on the file icon. And so Blender's file browser will appear, and you can select a folder that you want Blender to save your finished rendered video. So I have mine on the desktop. You could also put it in the downloads or the videos folder, or really whatever you want, and then just click on the accept button. Now here on the file format, I'm gonna click here on the PNG, and I'm gonna change this to the FFmpeg video. And then I'll be using the same render settings that I used earlier. So if you click on the color management, you don't want this to be set to filmic when you're doing video editing. So if you're only doing video editing with Blender, then you can click here on the render properties, and you can open up the color management, and you just want to make sure that the view transform is standard and the look, just set that to none. So that is if you're doing video editing. However, I use the 3D side of Blender, so I leave this at filmic, but then when I drag in videos, Blender detects that I'm video editing, so it changes it back to standard. So for most things, you probably won't need to worry about this, but if you're mainly doing video editing, leave this at standard. So now I can go back here to the output properties. So then here on the encoding speed, again, I'll use the same settings that I like to use. So here on the container, I like to use MPEG-4, and then I'll leave these at the default, so H.264, the medium quality and good. And then also here on the audio, I like to use AAC as the audio codec. So these are the settings that I use when I'm rendering my videos, and the videos that I upload to YouTube and all of that, I use these settings, and I think these settings work really well. So you can set these settings up as the default, so then when you open up Blender, these settings will already be on default. However, again, as I mentioned before, I also use the 3D side of Blender, so I actually have this set to PNG on default because I usually render out 3D images, but if you're just doing video editing in Blender, or if you're mainly doing video editing, you can leave this at FFmpeg video. And then if you want to resize any of these things, like make this bigger, you could also scroll this up here and maybe make this smaller, and you could bring this out if you want to. Or if you want to, for instance, close this file browser here, what you can do is click right here in the corner when the crosshair appears, and then you can click and drag over, and you can see the mouse is going to turn into a little arrow, and then you can drag back, and then you can let go. And that is actually going to close that window. And if you want to open a new window, then you can click here in the corner when the crosshair appears, and you can click and drag out. And then to change the editor type of this window, you can click right here. And then, for instance, you could change this back to the file browser. And when I'm doing video editing in Blender, I actually don't like to use the file browser just because I drag the videos in from the file browser, which is on my other monitor. So I click right here, hold my mouse down, drag over here, and then drag back and let go just to close that. And that just gives me a bit more space. And you can also press the T key to open up this side panel here, or if you don't like the channels, you can close them. Now, some other settings that I like to use, if I click on the playback here, I like to change the sync to the sync to audio. I like that, so I leave that on default. So I'm just going to turn that on. And I also like to use the audio scrubbing, so I turn that on as well. Now there's another setting that I like to change, and that is if I click with my mouse wheel and pull up and down, you can see I actually can't pull up and down, and that is because if I click here on view, there is this setting which is limit view to contents. And I actually like to turn this off because I want to be able to have an infinite amount of space, so I'm going to turn this off by clicking on it. Now if I click and drag with my mouse wheel, you can see I can move up and down, and if I actually bring this out here just so you can see it, so here's all the channels, I can click and drag with my mouse wheel, and you can see I pretty much have infinite channels, whereas if this view was turned on, so the limit view to contents, now if I try to drag it, I can only see these 8 channels. So I prefer to have a lot more space, so I click on view and turn off the limit to contents. So you can turn on or off that setting if you want to. So once you have Blender completely set up to how you like it, so that when you open up Blender, this will be the default, you can scroll right over here on the top, and you can click on File, and then you can click here on Defaults, and you can click on Save Startup File. And then once you click on that, you'll have to confirm it, so just click on it one more time. Now I've already set up my own default startup file in Blender, so I'm not going to do this, but this is what you can do. So you can set up Blender however you like, click on Save Startup File, and then when you open up a new scene in Blender, this is going to be the default startup in Blender. So you won't even have to go over to the video editing, it'll already be set up as a video editor. Alright, so this is going to wrap it up for part 2 of my video editing in Blender tutorial series for beginners. So I hope you've been easily able to follow along, and I hope you're learning a lot, and thank you for watching. And again, if you'd like to help support me and this channel, then some great ways to do that are on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page and the YouTube memberships. I'll have all the links in the description. But there's still so many more more things to cover about video editing in Blender, so when the third part is released, it'll be right up there on the end screen, and also I'll have the link in the description. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in part 3.